And thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Good. Thank you for having me here. And it's so great that we can get together now with all the mess that's going on in the world and talk about happiness. And not just happiness, but some of the good stuff that goes with it, like getting old and dying. Or, as I like to think of it, living long and not forever. Because after all, these are two of the great gifts that we're given, and I don't think I would want one without the other. And I'm going to ask you today to think about old age not as a problem that needs to be solved or fixed, but as this incredible resource that it's ours to tap. You know, there's so many shortages now, housing, affordable housing or clean water, but old age is something we have in greater abundance than ever before. And some people look at this abundance and call it an age tsunami or a silver tsunami, this destructive force that's going to come crash on our shores. And some people look at it and call it grandma or dad, and some people call it that face in the mirror. So I'm going to talk about what we can learn, whatever age we are, from people who have lived long enough to know something about life. And it's not information you can get on the internet. Read it in the New York Times, can't Google it, and Facebook can't sell it to the Russians. But the great thing is that all we have to do really is listen and take a deep breath and listen some more and say thank you. And before I get too much further in the talk, I want to talk about those two words, thank you, because they're really the start of the lessons in this book. And I never quite knew what they meant until I met a man named Fred Jones. There's Fred. And this was in the beginning of 2015. And Fred was 87 at the time, and he was living alone in a walk-up apartment in Brooklyn. And he was in the process of losing parts of 2 toes to gangrene. His closest daughter was dying of stage 4 breast cancer. See, I told you I'd be in the happiness zone here. But when I asked Fred the best period of his life, he said, right now. And he said, my favorite time of the day is waking up in the morning and saying, thank God for another day, on my way to 110. So I didn't really get this. I looked at Fred's life, and I didn't see what it was that he had to be grateful for, or how he could possibly want another 20, 25 years of it. But I did know one thing. I knew that every time I visited Fred, I came away feeling happier than I was before. And part of that, I have to say, was just Fred. I mean, look at him. Fred was a player. Fred had 6 kids by 4 different women. And he was always telling a dirty joke or singing like Billy Eckstine or talking about the flashy suits he used to wear to the Savoy Ballroom back before his orthopedic shoes cramped his style. One of my first visits to Fred, we went to the supermarket, and Fred cruised the cashiers to see who was the prettiest before checking out. He liked to say he was a bon vivant, and he never pronounced it the same way twice. And he was always after me to fix him up with one of those real fine chicks that I knew, because I too must be a bon vivant. So after a couple months of this, of visiting Fred and always getting that same kind of rush out of it, I began to follow his lead. And I don't mean that I started to cruise the cashiers at the supermarket, but instead of grumbling about the problems that I had in my life, which I'm pretty good at, as a newspaper reporter, I began to make it a point to consciously give thanks for the good things in my life. Because I figured if Fred could do it, I really had no excuse not to. And I started with the easy stuff, like the love I'd had from my parents growing up, or my amazing girlfriend, or that I get to go to a job that I actually like doing. And I have an unfailing alarm system that always wakes me up in the morning, even on weekends. I know it's a cheap one, but still. But this is pretty easy, but it sent me on a second train of thought that took me where I wasn't expecting. And what I mean by that is that I began to understand gratitude the way that Fred did. For Fred, it wasn't just that momentary good feeling you get when someone does you a favor or gives you something. It wasn't a response to anything in particular at all. It was a way of looking at the world all the time. Being grateful in this way means acknowledging all the forces outside yourself that are responsible for many and maybe even most of the good things in your life. And that for the most part, they come your way without you having to do anything to make them possible. Like you didn't have to invent chocolate or sex. You didn't have to compose the great works of Mozart. And you don't have to push anybody out of the way to enjoy them. Being grateful this way means seeing that the world isn't this opponent you need to beat out or a punishment you need to push back against. More often than not, it's on your side. So you seem like a nice group, so I would ask you to do something for me now. Can everybody think of one thing that they're grateful for? Just one thing. It can be something small, it can be something large. Anybody not able to do that? Not able to do it? Well, the thing about gratitude is that researchers have found that just doing that, just writing down one thing that you're grateful for on a regular basis, has a profound effect on people. They sleep better. They have greater sense of well-being. They're more optimistic about the future. And the effects are physiological as well. They have lower blood pressure, better immune function, less inflammation, and lower levels of the stress hormone, cortisol. So when I started to do this, I still had all the following Fred's lead, giving thanks for things all the time. I still had all the complaints that I had before, but I found that I just didn't have time for some of them, and others looked pretty puny next to all the things I was giving thanks for. And it was like flipping a switch. You know, I understood how Fred could always be in such a good mood. It wasn't because his life was easy, but it's because he always found things to be grateful for, even when it was very, very hard. And once I started doing this and it really sunk in, I never wanted to go back to the way I was before. About that. You guys don't know me, but my friends, when I told them I was going to write a book about happiness, they said, "What? You kidding? You are the last person who would ever write a book about happiness." And it's true, or at least it was. You know, I'm a newspaper reporter. We don't do happy. By nature, I'm a grumposaurus. So most years, like my top 10 movie list has maybe 5 movies on it, because everything else kind of pisses me off. And I used this anger and this dissatisfaction as the fuel to get me going in the morning. And they were useful. They were productive. But they were also corrosive to me and my relationships with the people around me. And what I came to realize was that they were also a negative way of looking at the world, because I was looking at what was missing or deficient in my life or defective, and not at what was there. And I compared that to Fred's sense of gratitude, giving thanks every day for another day. You know, that was an essentially positive way of looking at the world. I was looking at the glass and seeing only the part of it that was empty, and Fred was seeing the part of it that was full. Same glass, different viewpoint. So I set out. This book is the story of how I gave up that way of thinking and the lessons I learned from 6 people who knew something about life. It's not really a book about old age. It's about how we can all live better now, all of us, whatever age we are. It just happens to be informed by 6 pretty wise older people. The story begins in 2015 when I set out to write a year-long series in the New York Times on people aged 85 and up. Why them? Because according to the census, they're one of the fastest growing age groups in the country. When I was born, there were fewer than 1 million, and now there's a little more than 6 million. And I don't mean to scare you, but imagine there suddenly being 6 times as many teenagers running around. Not going to happen, but we're safe. Lock the doors, though. So I wanted to know, if there's really so many older people now, what are their lives like day to day? And I wanted to know this from the true experts, the people who were living it. Because if you think about it, so much of what we think we know about old age comes from people who have never been old. It's as if everything you ever read about China and life in China came from people who had never set foot there. And it makes a difference, and I think we don't know what we're missing, because we don't know what to ask. As one of the women in my book is always telling her daughter, "I was your age, but you were never my age." Can't argue with that, Helen. That's Helen. So I started this project the way I start most of my projects, by going out and looking for characters. And I wasn't looking for that 92-year-old who's still jumping out of airplanes and running marathons and drinking martinis. And I didn't want those Stepford seniors that you see on the brochures for retirement communities in Arizona, who are like this, you know, and they always seem to be spending the whole day swing dancing and having sex. I don't know, you know, I don't know how they do it. You know, I just wanted regular people, and I found 6 great ones. They were as diverse as the age group itself. They were gay and straight, and black and white and Asian, a retired civil servant, and an artist who, at 95, is still working. A man who never settled down, that would be Fred, and a woman who never dated after losing her husband of 50 years, and a couple who met in a nursing home, and they had the courage to love one another, even knowing that they probably couldn't do so for very long, and that one of them would likely watch the other one decline. And for the next year, and really the next 3.5 years, these people became my surrogate elders, meaning they gave me clippings to read, pushed chocolates on me when I visited, and said, "John, why don't you visit more often?" So I went into the project the way we usually write about old age, thinking that I would spend a year with them and just document the toll that old age was taking on their lives. Maybe they'd fall, they'd start to forget things. Maybe they'd become socially isolated. And at first I found exactly what I was looking for, you know, because old age really is the gift that keeps on taking. So Fred, as I mentioned, Fred's practically homebound in that walk-up apartment he can't afford to move out of. Up 2 flights of stairs he can't walk without excruciating pain. Ping Wang, who was from China and Hong Kong, she lived on just $700 a month in Social Security, and she couldn't afford the pain medication for her sore joints, so she had to tear her lidocaine patches in half to make them last longer. John Sorensen, who was a gay man who lost his partner of 60 years, and he said every time we got together that he wanted to die. He said, "The only bad thing about dying is I won't be alive long enough to enjoy the fact that I finally died." So for a newspaper reporter, this is pretty rich material. Journalism loves a good problem. But as I spent more time with them, what I came to realize was that just looking at their problems wasn't getting at the truth about how they saw their lives. Whatever hardships they had or whatever disabilities they had, none of them defined themselves by those things. Only other people did that. They'd all lost something. They'd lost their spouses or their mobility or their keen eyesight or hearing. But none of them had lost everything. And they all lived for the things they could still do, not for the things they'd lost. And this became my first overarching lesson of my time with them, that whatever hardships we have, whatever age we are, we have an active say in what role we give them in our lives. It's a choice. As Ping Wang put it, when you get old, you have to make yourself happy. Otherwise, you get older. You can go to a museum and think, I'm in a wheelchair with a bunch of half-deaf older people, we can't hear the docent, or my girlfriend doesn't love me, or my job's a pain, or I'm running out of money. Or you can think, wow, Michelangelo. You know, in other words, happiness is a choice you make. True for the old, true for the young. If you can't be happy until all your problems are fixed, you're not going to be happy. If you're waiting for happiness to come your way, you might be waiting a long time. Well, as you might imagine, the elders all understood this better than I did. They didn't expect all their problems to be fixed. At their age, they knew that some were only going to get worse. But they went on with their lives. If they liked reading or art, or they loved listening to music or taking care of their plants, they put their energies into these things that meant something to them. For all 6 of them, the thing that was most important was spending time with other people, the people they cared about, their loved ones. So they made this the focal points of their lives, not something they squeezed into busy work schedules. The main thing is that all looked for contentment within themselves, not in their outside circumstances, which they knew were sooner or later going to get bumpy. Now, there's an image we have of older people as grumpy or depressed, right? You've all heard it. And some people are. But some people are unhappy at any age. It's really a false stereotype. The numbers just aren't there. Sociologists have known this for so long that they even have a name for it. They call it the paradox of aging. That as much as our culture worships youth and hard bodies, and everybody wants to be young, older people are more content with their lives than younger people. They're less stressed, less afraid of death, better able to understand that loss is a part of life, not something we share with everybody who's ever been born, not something that we're singled out for individually. Even though I knew this number and I read it for a long time, I didn't quite understand it. I didn't understand how it was that people whose bodies were in decline and whose minds were in decline could possibly be more content with their lives than people who were in the so-called prime of life. In other words, what did they know that the rest of us didn't? So there's a number of explanations for the paradox of aging, but the best one, I think, comes from a woman named Laura Carstensen. And she runs the Longevity Center at Stanford. And her take is that it's a question of time reference, that younger people have a long time horizon in front of them, so they're putting their energy into gathering as much information and experience as they can, because they don't know what they're going to need later on. And this not knowing creates a lot of anxiety and maybe even fear. And some of the experience they seek out is painful or damaging. Older people see a short time horizon in front of them, so they put their energies into things that are pleasing in the short term. Maybe they start the meal with dessert. We did a story on this in the Times a couple years ago, and I think it's a great idea. If you want to emulate older folks, start the meal with cake. In memory tests, if you show people pairs of images, older people will remember the positive ones better than the negative ones, because these are more pleasing memories to hang on to. Younger people remember them both about the same, because they don't know what's going to be on the test. You put those brains into in the laboratory setting under MRI, fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging scanners, and they find that the older brains fire more strongly when they're looking at the positive image than the negative ones. Again, younger people about the same. So this means that older people are not only retaining that positive information, but maybe they're more drawn to it more in the first place. And just as a point of comparison, when the scientists have studied people who meditate, they find that their brains also respond strongly to the positive images and weakly to the negative ones. And this means that all the time that people spend meditating and all the money they spend going to those meditation retreats, what they're doing is trying to train their brains to work like the brains of older people. As my woman Helen says, put that in your pipe and smoke it. Fred Jones described life in the shorter time horizon really well. We were in his apartment one time, and he asked me to define happiness for him. And I told him what I thought it was, and Fred just said, that's not happiness. Happiness to me is what's happening now. It's not the next world, it's not the dance you're going to go to tonight. If you're not happy at the present time, you're not happy. Some people say, I get that new fur coat or a new automobile, I'll be happy